You ever wonder what it'd be like to be stranded on a deserted island? I'm pretty sure you've all heard of this. It's a lot different than what you'd originally expect upon hearing the title. I'm sure many of you have seen Lord of the Flies referenced in various media, but didn't really know it. Lord of the Flies was written by William Golding and published in 1954. Golding got the inspiration for this story from the 1857 novel The Coral Island, A Tale of the Pacific Ocean. He wrote Lord of the Flies as a counterpoint to Coral Island. There's even a reference to it right at the end when the boys are being rescued. I listened to an audiobook that featured a recording of William Golding reading Lord of the Flies, and including some commentary at the beginning and ending of the book. It was very fascinating. Anyways, the story begins with a plane being shot down and crashing on a nearby island. This plane contained a lot of schoolboys. All of the adults on the plane are killed, so it's up to the boys to figure out a way to get themselves rescued. One of the boys, Ralph, and another named Piggy, have found a conch shell on the beach. Ralph uses it as a horn to gather all the survivors and make a plan. Since everyone sees Ralph as an authority figure, they vote him as their chief. Ralph has a few survival plans laid out. The big one being lighting a signal fire. Since none of the boys know how to properly start a fire, they use Piggy's glasses and reflected sunlight to start one. Ralph also assigns the boys to do certain jobs like hunt and gather food and build shelters. At first, everything seemed to be working well, but after a bit, the boys stopped working toward survival. Ralph tries to get them back working, but the boys ignore him. Then paranoia starts up when some of the boys claim to see a beast. Ralph doesn't believe the beast exists, since the only animals on this island are pigs. The boys aren't really too fond of Ralph at this point and start to like one of the other boys, Jack, who claims that he will go out and kill the beast. One day, Jack brings most of the boys out to go hunt pigs, but he also brings along some of the boys who were keeping track of the signal fire. A ship passed right by the island and no one was there to keep the fire going. While Jack and the others successfully caught and killed a pig, Ralph is rightfully angry because the fire went out and they could have been rescued. It seems that a lot of the boys don't seem to care about being rescued, and Ralph has second thoughts about what he's doing, but Piggy reassures him that Ralph is doing his best. Well, one night, there is an aerial battle going on above the island, and a pilot ejects from his plane and dies as he descends onto the island. Twin boys, Sam and Eric, mistake the corpse as the beast and run to tell everyone. Ralph, Jack, and another boy named Roger go out to check out the corpse. But since the pilot landed in a tree and the parachute got tangled, and it's dark out, the boys run believing that the beast is real. Jack tries to turn the boys against Ralph, but does not succeed. He goes off alone to form his own tribe, but over time, more and more boys start to join him. Simon, one of the boys, goes out to the island's forest, often to be alone. One day, he finds Jack's tribe making an offering to the beast. It's a pig's head on a stick. Of course, as is natural with any dead thing out in the open, flies come by. Simon actually has an imaginary conversation with the pig head, calling it the Lord of the Flies. In this conversation, the Lord of the Flies mentions that there is no beast and eventually the other boys would turn against him. Well, Ralph and Piggy decide to visit Jack's tribe that night and find out that the boys have been painting their faces with clay and engaging in ritualistic dancing. Around that time, Simon gets a better look at the beast and discovers that it is the corpse of a pilot. Simon goes out to tell Jack's tribe, but since it's nighttime and Simon just appears out of nowhere, all of the boys assume that Simon is the beast and they beat him to death. The next day, Ralph is having a crisis of what happened the night before. Meanwhile, Jack intends to steal Piggy's glasses since that's their only means of starting a fire. Jack and his followers raid Ralph's camp and take Piggy's glasses. They then head over to their new base called Castle Rock. Ralph, Piggy, Sam, and Eric decide to travel to Castle Rock in order to get Piggy's glasses back and confront Jack. Now, they travel there, but the boys simply won't listen to Ralph. Roger triggers a trap that shatters the conch and kills Piggy. Ralph manages to get out of there, but Sam and Eric are tortured by Jack and his followers until they agree to join the tribe. Now, Ralph meets up with Sam and Eric in secret where they tell him to run away as Jack fully intends to kill Ralph. And the next morning, Jack and his followers are tracking down Ralph, but they have lit the forest on fire. Ralph continues to run from the boys to the beach, where he trips and falls right in front of a naval officer. Now, this naval officer stopped to investigate the forest fire here, and he's a little surprised and disappointed to see that many of the boys have turned so feral. All of the boys stop right then and there, now in the presence of an adult. Ralph and the other boys start weeping over the end of innocence, while the naval officer turns to look at his cruiser nearby. That's where the book ends. I believe it's implied that the boys were eventually taken home, but since we don't have a sequel for Lord of the Flies, we don't know for sure what happened after that instance. Alright, there's a lot to analyze here. Firstly, I want to reiterate something that the author said in that audiobook recording I listened to. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but Golding expressed that the most important interpretation to his book is your interpretation. Not my interpretation, not your teacher's interpretation, but yours. I will share some of the things I've found and interpreted, but please remember that your interpretation may be different from mine. Okay, there's a lot of symbolism contained within this book. The conch, for one, could be seen as a symbol of authority and a stable society. When the conch shatters, that's when all the boys except Ralph have become quite feral and considered a lawless society. Also, keeping the signal fire alive could have a similar meaning. You have to uphold the law in order for it to actually be enforced. Without it, the fire goes out. Notice that when the boys stopped following their responsibilities, that things started to take a turn. These symbols seem to point to one thing. Without law, you are lost. It kind of reminds me of when I read The Time Machine and how the Morlocks and the Eloi were akin to animals after a long period of time. Also, the pighead, or the Lord of the Flies, is a symbol. Personally, I think the Lord of the Flies is a symbol for the tipping point or the downfall of humanity that's about to happen very soon. While yes, the conversation happened in Simon's head, the conversation was written down for us to read for a reason. It was foreshadowing to Simon's death and the tipping point in the boys' society. I'd also like to mention that the whole conversation with the Lord of the Flies could be a type of magical realism. We don't really know if anything supernatural is at work here, but that's the beauty of magical realism. We're not supposed to know. There's one thing I noticed as I was reading the book. In the beginning, when everyone was getting settled and planning things out, Jack was assigned to be a hunter. He actually ran into a pig at first and was ready to kill it, but he hesitated and the pig ran away. Now compare that to how he is near the end of the novel when he's full-on ready to murder the boys who dared disobey him. I believe that the murder of Simon was the point of no return for Jack and some of the other boys. Ralph and Piggy were to blame for Simon's murder as well, since they were there and participated in the frenzy. During Ralph's internal crisis, he starts to justify killing Simon. He knows it was murder, but he believes it was an accident since they were all frenzied and scared. Piggy says the same. It's a little disturbing to see this thought process laid out. I can't imagine how Jack justified his intentions to kill Ralph. There's also the question of the boys thinking about whether or not they want to be rescued. They feel somewhat free without the authority of adults over them. Even Ralph starts to reconsider the idea of rescue when he sees how the boys appear to be happy with what they're doing. Also, I want to point out how the narrator starts to describe the boys near the ending. They're no longer described as boys anymore, but savages. Ralph, being the only one who hasn't joined the tribe, still believes that each boy has a sliver of humanity, but stops believing that to be the case when his life is on the line. Then there's the end of innocence. Typically, a loss of innocence means that we see the world now for what it is and how much evil is within it. Ralph saw what a lawless world would look like, and has to live with that knowledge for the rest of his life. It's horrifying when you really think about it. Overall, this is an interesting novel with many interpretations. It was interesting to read it again with a new lens, but I realized as I was listening to the audiobook that I'm not that big a fan of the writing style. It does go into a lot of detail, and sure, that's important to get a good visual of the island and the boys, but over time, it starts to get a little bland. I don't think I'll be reading this book a third time. I still see why teachers are forcing their students to read it, and why it's been adapted twice. I've actually seen the 1963 adaptation in my sophomore year of high school. It was very accurate to the book. A little too accurate, if you ask me. I'd recommend this book for ages 16 and up. The excessive detail makes the book a little hard to understand, and it is very possible to skip over important things as you're reading or listening. Plus, the book does get a little graphic in certain areas, specifically the deaths. If you're looking for a fun-filled island survival adventure, this is not it. The book has affected many people over the years, including myself. I'm not sure I'll be picking up this book again anytime soon, but I do believe that it's an important read. I hope you'll be able to understand and find your own interpretation of this work. Happy reading!